Good morning, everyone. We are presenting a webinar today with regards to anxiety, some tips about how to manage anxiety, kind of having a think about what anxiety is, what the common symptoms of anxiety are. So just a brief look into and insight into some more of this, and this will be presented by myself, Aaron, a psychological wellbeing practitioner within Havering Talking Therapies, and my colleague.
Hi, I'm Ayse. I'm also a psychological wellbeing practitioner in Havering Talking Therapies.
Perfect. So I'm just going to load in the presentation now for everyone to see, and it is unfortunately going to take my camera off, or more should I say, fortunately there. So there we go. Can we see the PowerPoint still?
Yeah, so we've got the PowerPoint up now that we'll be talking through.
Perfect, golden. So here's the first slide. As mentioned, a little bit about the agenda, just reiterating what I have briefly said there. As it shows defining anxiety, exploring symptoms, some tools and techniques, how we can help manage anxiety further if need be, and then a bit of information surrounding our service. So if we start off with defining anxiety, as it shows here, anxiety is typically a symptom experience of unease, worry, or fear. It can be mild to severe. So this is anxiety as a symptom. When someone talks about feeling anxious, this is what they'll typically be talking about. And as a symptom, it can be one of the main difficulties in a multitude of different conditions. So someone with panic disorder experiencing panic symptoms will typically be anxious or be experiencing anxiety of some form. Be worried about the panic, for example, having a sort of a feeling of fear with regards to, experiencing panic attacks, as they can be very debilitating. If we have a phobia, such as agoraphobia or claustrophobia, being frightened of small spaces or being in crowds and things such as that, being out of the home, then we will also be having a form of anxiety there as a symptom, and PTSD as well, post-traumatic stress disorder, when experiencing a traumatic event in our life and having flashbacks, nightmares, and an unprocessing of that event. We will also be experiencing anxiety of some form there as well. So these are all common symptoms of anxiety, or should I say common disorders in which anxiety can exist from. And we can think of this also really as, the fact that everyone will experience anxiety to some form or another. Let's just take a very common example, such as sitting an exam or having a medical test or job interview. We may be somewhat anxious, somewhat worried about, what if I fail this exam? Because there is a bit of pressure, of course, to perform. If we're having a difficult conversation with a family member or friend, we're going to have a somewhat of a feeling of unease, even if it is just mild, for example, rather than severe. Obviously, if we have suffering with PTSD or have agoraphobia, phobia is more likely to be on the more severe side of things, on a typical note. So that's a little bit about anxiety as a symptom. Now we're going to move on to think about defining anxiety inside of mental health disorders, of which we support all of these disorders from our service. So I'll pass you over to Ayse.
So the most common anxiety experience is known as generalised anxiety disorder, or sometimes we call it GAD for short. And this is just anxiety or worry about a number of events or activities like work, family, or health. It's a long-term condition that causes you to feel quite anxious about lots of different situations and issues rather than one specific thing. So it's a generalised anxiety rather than a specific anxiety. People that have generalised anxiety feel anxious most days and quite often might struggle to remember when they last felt relaxed. As soon as one anxious thought is resolved or goes away, another one might appear about a different issue. So it's lots of different worries about lots of different things.
Mm-hmm. And now, if we think about two other situations that are commonly presented when it comes to sort of defining anxiety as a mental health difficulty or disorder, we can think firstly of social anxiety. So this being the frequent avoidance of social situations, worrying about being in social situations, or worrying about communication and things such as that. So often people experiencing social anxiety symptoms, or whom have social anxiety, if it is diagnosed, which it occasionally can be, before coming to our services, this will tend to show up with a worry of being judged or watched. So people will often have that sort of those worries about what if someone is looking at me, what if they're thinking X, Y, Z of me. Would be worried about embarrassing themselves, or being an embarrassment in a social situation. There'll be a lot of avoidance of these situations because we don't want to be preoccupied, you know, uh, about people judging us or thinking these things. So we'll avoid going out to crowded places. We'll avoid speaking in public places or speaking on the phone to friends for fear of saying something wrong, then being criticized, as mentioned. Uh, this can obviously also be mild to severe, as mentioned, with regards to anxiety as a symptom itself. So we can also have mild to severe social anxiety, depending on how much we're avoiding, these social encounters, and how preoccupied we are by the worries, by being criticized, by embarrassing ourselves, and so forth. And then we also have health anxiety, and this is where one will be preoccupied with their own health and the overwhelming idea of having an illness. There'll be an inability to resist these thoughts. One more overemphasize the severity of the symptoms. So, if we have a headache or an increased heart rate, this will be an interpretation of, I think I have a brain tumor, or I must have heart disease or something wrong with my heart. But in actual fact, as we know, many people have headaches and they're not sinister necessarily. Sometimes it's just, we're a bit stressed. And so we're having a hard day, we get a headache. Doesn't always necessarily mean, um, that something is wrong with us. But someone with health anxiety won't be able to balance out that argument. They'll very much be preoccupied with they have an illness. This will also sort of be shown with a lot of body scanning. So we'll constantly be aware of any headaches or changes to heart rate that we get. We'll be looking out for things, such as lumps or marks on the body, changes to our body that could suggest something wrong, and then typically seeking reassurance, be that from doctors or professionals, so making appointments or googling information on the internet is a very common thing to do as well. Which, as we know, when you Google symptoms on the internet, Google will normally just tell you that immediately something's wrong with you, and you need to be checked out. So, not the best thing to do if we have health anxiety. And no, when we have, if we're thinking about social anxiety or health anxiety, what we need to remember here as well is this is different from GAD because we are only worrying about our health, or we're only worrying about being in social situations. If we worry about our health and social situations and finances and then we're still coming back to generalized anxiety disorder more often than not, with symptoms of these other presiding anxiety disorders. So that's a little bit more about, the examples of anxiety as a mental health disorder. Now we're going to move on to think about how we can work on these things on a general basis. And no, with the majority of the things we're going to talk about now, they are predominantly used specifically for generalized anxiety disorder. And there are other things that our service can support with when we're focusing more on a specific anxiety disorder. But this is always, nevertheless, still a good place to start, because it does tackle worries on a more general sense. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit about the vicious cycle of anxiety, and then we're going to, as I said, talk about some specific ways in which we can to manage anxiety. So I'll pass you back over.
Yeah, so this is symptoms of general anxiety, and how it can present itself physically and consciously in our thoughts. So this shows that sometimes we can get caught in a bit of a vicious cycle with anxious sort of thoughts or worries, those physical feelings of anxiety, different behaviours when we're feeling anxious, and then the emotions that brings up. So thoughts wise, common symptoms when we're anxious could be what if thoughts or catastrophizing, predicting the worst case scenarios. I will get fired. What if I have a serious illness? I will die. What if something's wrong? So very sort of worst case scenario thoughts and worries. And quite often they sound like what if, what could happen, what might happen. So those hypothetical worries that are sort of future focused. This can then sometimes lead to physical feelings, like you might feel tense, you might have chest pains, find it hard to breathe. You might have that butterfly feeling, or you might be quite irritable as a result of these thoughts and worries. And then emotions, you could experience fear, you might be upset, feeling helpless, frustrated, anxious. So all of these tie in to your emotions. And then behaviours, so things we do differently when we are feeling anxious. It might be that we avoid certain situations where the anxiety has presented itself in the past, or we might reassurance seek. So if you're worried about your health, you might go to the doctors lots and lots to get that reassurance from your doctor. Or we might check our work emails more and more if we've got worries around work. So these certain behaviours we do differently when we're feeling anxious. We may even put things off because we don't feel like we can tackle these issues without the anxiety coming up. So sometimes we just simply avoid, and avoiding that activity we think avoids the anxiety, but usually that's just a short-term relief. So we can get caught in a vicious cycle between these four areas, and it can be hard to break out of that cycle. And that's where some CBT techniques come in to help break out of that vicious cycle, which will be explained in the next slides.
Yeah, so the first thing we can really think of here is what we call a worry diary. This is something that we use very commonly within our service, but people can use this, by themselves, seeking self-help and trying to support one's own anxiety. And what we can see here in this worry diary is just asking a variety of things that help us to record what worries we have on each given day and how we're feeling about them and the specificity of the worry. So the first thing we need to think about here is to start to get a good understanding of the situations or the triggers of potential worries. So as we can see here, it says who, what, where, and when. So what we're thinking about is who were we with when we were, when we suddenly had an anxious thought. What were we doing? Where were we? And what time was this? Often, what we'll find is as we start to record more and more worries and get more accustomed and feel more confident at being able to record our worries and catch them as they come into our consciousness, we will notice there will probably be some sort of pattern. If we're socially anxious, there will be particular people who make us more anxious than others. If we are worrying about work, there will be particular there'll be particular instances at work. So what, on in terms of the situation, that will lead us to be more anxious. So when I say situation and when we're thinking of the what part, it will be like if a certain person asking me to do a certain job related activity or exercise, I'm going to be anxious. So as we start to pick up on these things, we can get a good idea for ourselves of where perhaps this anxiety is coming from. And so the next part we put is we write down exactly what the worry is and we try and be as specific as possible. So here, what I normally say is we're not looking, or one shouldn't look to put down things such as I was worrying about work or I was worrying about my boss. Although that is, of course, what the worry is about, we're trying to be more specific. So we want to capture exactly what our brain threw at us into our consciousness. So if we catch ourselves thinking, what if I get fired? That's what we want to be thinking about. That's what we want to record in this worry diary. So rather than it was about work, what exactly was the worry? Was it what if my internet goes and I can't get that deadline? What if the PowerPoint is awful? What if I don't meet my deadlines? What if I get fired? As specific as possible. That's what we're looking for. And then we do a prediction. So we're trying to identify here, what is the worry predicting to happen? So, as I just mentioned with the last one, what if I get fired? Well, we're predicting that we're not going to meet some, level of efficiency at work, and therefore we're going to get fired. That's what the prediction is. Then we want to know the intensity. So we want to understand for ourselves how anxious were we exactly as we had this worry? And then we have the type of worry. So we want to start to get accustomed to this idea of is this worry problem focused? So is it something that is solvable, or is it hypothetical? And so what we mean by this, when we're thinking about is it problem solvable, other words, they're practical, we're thinking about is there something we can do to resolve this anxious worry? And the common examples of these types of things will be like, what if my tooth falls out? You know, um, and we could be thinking, we could be worrying, I have a toothache. What if my tooth falls out? There is a practical element of a solution to that, which is to not avoid the very fact that we have a toothache and to go see the dentist. If we see the dentist and they fix the tooth or they do something about it, we're not going to have a toothache anymore. So we no longer have something to worry about. And for a lot of people, that presides anxiety in itself because that means we have to tackle the problem. But in the long term, these are really good things to get accustomed to starting to feel confident at doing, because in the long term, we'll have less to worry about and therefore be able to manage anxiety better. And if it's a hypothetical worry, well, then we need to do some other tactics and other techniques, which we have further down in the next slides, to try and learn how to basically let these worries go in a non-cliche way, because obviously it's not as easy as just letting them go and they disappear. Obviously, there's a little bit of work we need to do for ourselves to get to that stage, but that's what we're trying to figure out. And when we say hypothetical, we're normally thinking of what if worries. What if I get fired? That's a hypothetical situation. What if my car breaks down? Because typically we're thinking about the future and what could or couldn't happen. In most cases, when we get something wrong, we're not immediately fired from work on the spot. So if we just think, what if I get fired all the time? Or what if my car breaks down? Our car doesn't break down, 40 times a year. Happens every now and again, and worrying about it doesn't predict whether or not it's more likely to happen. It doesn't change the instance and the probability in which that event will occur. So it's hypothetical to worry about such a situation, and this is what we want to get used to doing inside ourselves. And in terms of appraising our anxiety, we want to start tackling it head on by using a worry diary in this way to start challenging. Okay, I'm worrying about a practical thing there. Okay, I'm worrying about a hypothetical thing. How much is it causing me anxiety? What am I predicting to happen? All of this is really, really useful in this sense. So that's a little bit about the worry diary. And then next, we have the worry tree here.
So the worry tree is a good way to sort of consciously notice the worries as your brain sort of produces them, and it can tie into using the worry diary to sort of differentiate between whether we can do anything about these worries or whether we can't, and they're hypothetical. So we sort of can look to see, what is it that I'm worrying about? Is it something that I can do something about? And you can follow the worry tree down, either following yes or no if it is something we can do, and solve this worry. Because real worries in the here and now can be managed, and we can come up with practical solutions to almost solve the worry. Which will obviously remove it from your mind. You won't think about it anymore as you've solved it. But some worries go down the no side of the worry tree because it isn't solvable. As Aaron gave some examples about, what if my car breaks down in the future? That's not something we can really solve here and now. So we need to learn to try and let these worries go, change our focus of attention. There isn't anything we can do about it. So it can be really helpful to follow this worry tree down to the yes or no side and really start to see that some worries we can solve, some we can't, and we need to try and let go. And we have techniques for both of these. So for solving worries, we have a certain technique we can use, but equally to manage those worries that we can't do anything about, we do have a technique that can help with trying to put those aside, which I think is explained on the next slide.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, in terms of hypothetical worries, if we are thinking, or if we come to a conclusion that a worry is hypothetical, then we are going to try and learn to manage this type of worry, these hypothetical worries inside of worry time. This is another reason why the worry diary is so good, or can be so useful, should I say, because it ties in with using worry time. So we use these two techniques, the diary and the worry time, hand in hand. So what we start off initially with is thinking about setting a time each day. So every single evening, for example, definitely not too close to bedtime, in which we are going to actively worry about every single worry that we would otherwise be worrying about anyway during the whole day. So if we imagine if we're someone who is anxious, who has generalized anxiety disorder and worries about a lot of different things, we tend to worry about them all throughout the day. So what we say is, rather than do that, let's set a time aside every evening which you will worry about. You will worry about it. And what that gives the confidence of, or the idea of, the reassurance of, is that I'm not going to just tell myself I'm never going to worry again, because that typically isn't really that plausible. So we tell ourselves, I'm still going to worry about it. I'm just going to find a structured time in which I'm going to do so. And then, so what we're going to do during this worry time is we're going to run through all the worries in our worry diary. So what we ask with worry time is, we ask one to record the worries throughout the day in the diary, and then practice letting them go. And we'll talk about ways in a moment in which we can help to let go of worries throughout the day after we've recorded them in the worry diary. So let's imagine we have written all the worries down. We have a full worry diary come 7 o'clock. Um, and now we're sitting down to do worry time. Everything so far has gone fairly well. What we're then going to do is run through some structured questions. And there are lots of questions designed to be used during worry time to help increase our confidence that we can, in fact, let these worries go. So some of these examples are, we ask ourselves, how did I feel when I wrote down the worry, when, as it came into my head during the day? And how do I feel about this very same worry now that I have postponed it, and now that I'm looking at it again, come 7 o'clock in the evening? Do I feel the same way? Do I feel less anxious reading it back now? Do I feel more anxious? And what we'll learn from this first question, more likely or more often than not, is no, I do indeed feel less anxious now. Even if it's not significantly less anxious, we're probably going to feel slightly more able to manage it, because it's not as it's popped into our head during the day and caught us off guard, whilst we're trying to do a number of other activities such work or look after our children, so forth, so forth. And the next thing we're going to ask ourselves is, would continuing to worrying about this during the day have made any difference? So if I hadn't wrote it in the worry diary and practiced the technique to let it go, and I just worried about it all day, would that have made a difference? Would that have somehow made it easier now that I'm in worry time? Would I have had a solution for it? Would my day have gone differently? The answer, again, more likely than not, is going to be no here too. Then we're going to ask ourselves, what could I have been doing, or what can I be doing now instead of worrying? So given I'm asking myself all these questions, and I'm seeing how unbeneficial it was to be worrying about these things, because I'm getting a lot of no's now in the worry time. What could I be doing instead now, instead of asking myself all these questions all the time? What can I be doing with this time? And what was I making use of my time before, thanks to having set this worry time in the first place? Because we'll start to realize we are slowly giving ourselves a little bit more leeway during the day and during the evening to do other things, rather than occupy ourselves by our anxieties and our worries. And then what we can also ask ourselves is, because sometimes this can be really useful, is, did the thing we were did the thing we were worrying about come true? Did the scenario we were envisioning happen? Did I uh, did the presentation go really badly, and was I in the end fired? No, I wasn't. So, why was I actually worrying about that? And sometimes maybe the worry actually does come true. Um, you know, not very often, but sometimes, bad things do happen. And scenarios do happen that are not envisioned or not what we want. Hence why we worry about these things in the first place, because, they can, you know, in a slim chance, more often than not, come true every now and again. Well, we can ask ourselves, if something did happen that we were worrying about during the day, how did I cope with it? Did I in fact manage better than I anticipated? And often what we'll find is we would have tried, a practical solution. We'll try to resolve it. And if we didn't resolve it maybe as well as we wanted to, well, now we're in worry time. Can we sit down now and think of ways that we would deal with a similar situation if it would happen again in a more proactive way? This helps to give us more confidence at problem solving the worries and feeling more able to managing, a certain anxious thoughts, because we know that we can actually, overcome them. And also with this worry time, which I forgot to mention, is if we're writing stuff down during the worry diary and they're practical, we're typically going to try and resolve those where possible during the day as those worries come into our head. But we can also get accustomed to finding solutions and planning, ways to solve these practical worries in the worry time. That's another thing we can do during the worry time as well. So that's the worry time, when it's used in structured form, and you can find examples of this and lists of how to follow a worry time schedule online, if you want more information there.
And so the next slide talks about how to manage anxiety, taking our minds off of these worries until that set worry time that Aaron just explained. So when you have a worry throughout the day, there are certain techniques you can use to take your mind off of that worry in the here and now, because you set a time that you're going to come back to thinking about it. And quite often this can be the hardest part because you're trying to break a habit. Worrying is a habit, and it's difficult to break habits quickly. And so it takes a bit of time and practice. But some of the things you can try out. So here it talks about some breathing exercises, and soothing practices. So ways that you can breathe or relax your muscles just to help release tension. So starting with your neck and moving down your body. There are certain techniques that follow through consciously noting and calling out any tension and working through it by breathing and relaxing as you go through your body and relaxing each part, relaxing each muscle, and doing that in a conscious way to relieve that tension. Sometimes we talk about grounding ourselves back into the present moment. So it's practicing things within your environment that you can see. So maybe 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, smell, or something around you that you can taste. And looking at what's around you in your environment can bring you back into the here and now and help take your mind off that worry that you might be struggling with. So yeah, it's just really bringing you back into the present moment, looking at your surroundings. Even if you're just at home, you can usually pick out things you can see around you, hear, touch, smell and taste. And you might even sometimes do this without realizing. You might go out for a nice walk and really be taking in your surroundings, things you can see around you, things you can hear around you. There might be certain smells when you go out for a walk. So all of these things can be helpful, and you might not even realise that you're doing it. And we can use these exercises to focus on the feeling of where we are right now, being attentive to our thoughts and feelings, and really coming back into the present moment. Mindfulness as well, that's a great way to sit within the present moment, focusing on something really specific. For example, trying to hear your own heartbeat and nothing else can be helpful to remove any external thoughts going on. So mindfulness is quite a popular technique to really bring you into the present moment and focus on specific things one at a time. And we have lots of links and recommendations for mindfulness within our service that we can recommend and send out to you. So yeah, all of these ways are helpful just whilst you're in the daytime, you're waiting for your set worry time allocated slot, just to take your mind off those worries as they keep coming up throughout the day.
And just to provide an example, perhaps if you if you're not thinking about accessing our service, off the back of this, but maybe, or accessing a talking therapy service, maybe you want to, try some techniques by yourself, such as some of these exercises. You can use an app that can be found on the Play Store if you're Android, or the iTunes store, the Apple store, called Headspace. Headspace, I think you pay for a monthly subscription, and they have access to some resources that can be used to sit within the present moment. Learn to focus. They have different musics. Um, they have different little mini exercises to help one sleep or to help one relax. You can also find links on YouTube, which will then be free. If you were to type in Headspace on YouTube, they tend to have some free resources that they've compiled there as well, for the main public to use, should they not want to get the app. But it then tends to be a bit more of a taster if you're going on YouTube rather than getting the app. And yeah, they'll have examples, I'm sure, of quite a few different grounding or mindfulness techniques and progressive muscle relaxation. If you type in those three words on YouTube, you'll find many people, be it a yoga instructors or mindfulness practitioners. Loads of different people have their own sort of tutorials and walkthroughs of a progressive muscle relaxation exercise. So you can definitely follow something such as that to get some more information and to have a go at these, if you're trying to use them, of course, to manage your anxiety, or if you're trying to use them to manage something else, such as stress. That can also be useful there. So I just thought I'd add that as well, just to give one example of where we can find this stuff. But now we just have some sort of more generalized tips and tricks for keeping well. And they definitely do tie in with everything we've been talking about today in terms of anxiety. And they do link in with all the things that we've talked about that can help manage anxiety, the worry diaries, the worry trees, so forth, so forth. And what we're really just thinking about here, is as basic as mindfulness or journaling something, or doing some physical exercise may seem. When we practice these things on a regular basis and in a structured way, when we make a real conscious effort to journal for a specific reason, such as use a worry diary to learn how to appraise my worries, or use a mental exercise such as grounding to bring me in the present moment and not be thinking about anxious thoughts. When we do this in a real sort of conscious, proactive way and on a regular basis, it does typically tend to then have the significant positive influence that we're looking at in terms of reducing our anxiety. And mainly because all of these things provide us with a real opportunity to slow down and engage with our present feelings and thoughts, as Ayse said. So we often are living in a very quick, fast-paced world where we don't really give ourselves too much time to sit with ourselves, or to learn to understand ourselves, or kind of question ourselves as to why we're feeling specific ways, or are stressed, so forth, so forth. And so all of these things do give us a good chance to try and come to those conclusions. And then obviously once we're more self-aware of something, well, then we're more likely to feel a bit more confident at trying to manage it and tackle it. And other examples here are really, trying to practice some self-affirmation, for example, can be a real good exercise. Being compassionate with ourselves, appreciating that, often if we are anxious, we do need to provide ourselves with a bit of time to understand this anxiety in ourselves. We need to be somewhat compassionate, and understand that, in fact, being anxious is a very common symptom of just humanity, really, being a human being. We all have we're all predisposed to worry to a certain extent. This is an evolutionary thing. We have threat systems designed for a reason, so that we can try to not get ourselves into difficult situations. The trouble is, we're now very wired all the time to be constantly looking out for things that can go wrong. And some of these things really aren't things that typically go wrong that often, which is why we can sometimes become stuck in a vicious cycle of generalized anxiety. So, I mean, symptoms of anxiety never really remove themselves indefinitely. There is no magic wand. We're never going to never be anxious again. But we can learn to manage and overcome the symptoms and the negative experiences that are tied in with being particularly anxious or being stuck in a vicious cycle. And so, linking back with what I've just basically said there, is being able to understand our triggers that lead to our vicious cycle. Once we know why we're feeling a certain way, or what is leading us to feel a certain way, is it work? Is it is there this particular person that I've had a negative experience with that is making me now worried about, meeting new friends or so forth, so forth. When we can understand a little bit more about the triggers and the situations that are leading to anxiety, well, then we're more likely to be able to manage them, as mentioned. And finally, really, is just also thinking about some minor tips and tricks, having positive routines such as the mindful exercises, the worry diary, using worry diaries, having some grounding techniques. All of those are really great, but other things that can be really helpful in a more general sense that we can all do, is just to develop positive routines. So positive routines of healthy eating. We know that when we're anxious, we tend to lose appetite because nausea and butterflies in the stomach are two common symptoms of anxiety. So trying really to find a way to have a routine, even if we need to make a calendar of when we're going to eat and things, and having a regular sleep and wake up a routine. These are useful as well because this does help regulate our hormonal and chemical balances, which can also sometimes be an explanation for increased anxiety. If we're unregulated, such as by sleeping all over the place, having no body clock, and things such as that. So these are all just other little examples and things to think about when we are trying to manage anxiety. They can be very, very helpful.
So the last slide here is just our referral and contact information. If you were thinking about perhaps accessing the service, you can follow this link here that we've got if you'd like to refer today. Click on that link and do it online, or you can call us on the 0300 300 1554 number, and it's option 2 for our Havering service. You can always contact your GP, have a chat with your GP, and your GP can refer you over as well if you prefer to. And of course, you can always check out our website that's linked here below, if you did want to just browse our website and have a think about it. We are also on social media, so our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram links are there below on the slide if you want to have a look at our social media as well. But yeah, it can be difficult to refer for the first time, so we've got a friendly admin team that can talk you through, take down any details and answer any questions you might have, if you did want to get in contact with us.
Mm-hmm. And just thinking about that as well, we ourselves, we only accept individuals who have a Havering GP. If you're just managing to catch this webinar and this discussion, perhaps on another form of media and another channel such as YouTube, and you're not in Havering, you can contact your own GP and discuss if they have a talking therapies service there. Most boroughs in London especially, and outside of London, there's a lot of places outside of London that I know of that have a talking therapy service. So you can just basically contact your GP and say you're struggling with XYZ and that you like a referral. So just in case anyone catches this webinar outside of that and thinks of contacting us or completing that Google Doc, I'll just give a heads up. If you weren't within Havering or had a GP, should I say, that was in Havering, we wouldn't be able to see you ourselves. So completing that Google Doc might be not very beneficial for you, essentially. So if that is the case, as I said, you can still contact your own GP or just type in talking therapies, followed by, I don't know, Brighton, if that's where you're at, or something like that, and see what comes up there. And you can follow the same channels, just in that location, to get a referral. But yeah, I think that is it for us. I think that's the end of the slideshow. So it was lovely speaking to everyone, and anyone who sees this, by all means, share this around if you do catch this. And as Ayse said, we do have our handles down at the bottom if you want to know a bit more about us. And yeah, thank you everyone.